Hey, this is Ina with you in the Fight Back. Today I want to tell you a little about a figure of Latin American history who I very much admire, a personal hero of mine, and that's Camilo Torres. And he was a martyr for the struggle for social revolution and national liberation in Latin America. And he also, peculiarly, or perhaps not so much as will become clear through this video, was a Catholic priest. Camilo Torres was born in Bogota, Colombia, of a rather actual upper-class family, and he actually became a priest, and he went to study sociology in Belgium, and he confronted the type of problems sociologists often confront: urbanization, poverty, those kind of things. And he comes back to Colombia in the 50s, and I'm just going to give you a very truncated version. Colombia at this point is very much in the midst of what they call the La Valencia. There's a great deal of violence in the country. Conservatives are attacking peasants. The two great parties, the liberals and the conservatives, are fighting each other, and guerrilla movements are starting to arise. And Torres encounters the great poverty that he sees in Colombia. And, the misery most of the population suffers due to neocolonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. And he wants to change it. But he recognizes through that the great parties of Colombia are very much tied to the oligarchy, that there's really going to be no effective way to change things in Colombia through those means. And he wants to do something together, and he creates something, and this is in the 60s, a national, a united front. I believe it's called the National Front, which brings together workers, peasants, slum dwellers, and others who want basic change. And Torres is very much moving in the direction that power had to be taken away from the privileged and given to the poor majorities. And he wanted a revolution, but he hoped for a peaceful change, but he was willing to recognize that violence may be necessary. And what Torres wanted, and this is a small quote I'm going to read out to you. Torres said that revolution was the way to bring about a government that feeds the hungry, clothes the naked, teaches the ignorant, puts into practice the works of charity and love for neighbor, not just every now and then, and not just for a few, but for the majority of our neighbors. The message sounds very biblical, and that makes sense considering that he was a priest. But as you can see, he's very much fusing this biblical message, this Christian Catholic message, with the demands for a new, more just society. And we can see in a sense, and I've spoken of religion before when I did Marx's critique of religion, that this is a case, this one man, this one example, is an example where religion is playing a much more positive force. We know the Catholic Church has often been a corrupt, horrible institution on the side of upper classes. It's backed fascism. We have the Crusades, we have the Inquisition, we have the genocide of indigenous peoples in the Americas. All of this is understood. But like any institution that exists in class society, its message can mean different things to people of different classes. And in some cases, granted it's a distinct minority, the message that Torres is certainly giving is very much appealing to those of the lower classes, workers, peasants. He wants to make the Christian message of love, the Christian message, of breaking the bonds of this corrupt, sinful world, a reality. And of course he sees that through revolution. And he says those who are not, believe I'm paraphrasing slightly, but those who are not living in revolution are living in sin. Because if you think about the Christian message of charity, and again, there will be those who criticize what I'm going to say, but here we go. If we say, give to the poor, we're accepting that there is a poor, that there are always going to be poor. And Torres' message is much different. He's saying the best charity we can do, and this is my interpretation, is to eliminate the need for charity altogether. I'm not saying that you shouldn't give to the poor. I'm saying wouldn't it be better if we didn't have to have charity because there were no rich or poor. They're a community of associated producers, a community of equals. And I believe that's what Torres is saying as well. And Torres, he realizes that the Colombian system, the neo-colonial imperialist system, is not going to give change. This has become clear in the 50s and 60s. And there's a new alternative coming up. That's the banner of Cuba, of Castro and Che, of armed struggle against reactionary dictatorships, against neocolonialism. And Torres is willing to put his beliefs into practice, which makes him so admirable. In late 1965, he joins the Army of National Liberation, which is a Cuba influence organization in Colombia. And unfortunately, in early 1966, he dies in combat. So that makes Camilo Torres, in a sense, he's probably second only to Che Guevara for his iconic status in Latin America. But he also shows the possibility of fusing revolutionary Christians and Marxists and other revolutionaries who may be of a more secular variety. And I was often asked by atheists and some fellow Marxists, can you name any Christians who you would stand with? And Camilo Torres is always the first name I come up with, because if I had to choose, I would choose his brand of Christianity. I remain an atheist, but I can't help but admire this man. I can't help but be moved by what he was willing to do, by his message. And what Camilo Torres did, and it's precursor to a lot of other changes that are coming to Latin America. Within a few years, you would have conferences of bishops. You'd have the fusion of priests and guerrillas in El Salvador and in Nicaragua. You would have, in a sense, this is the birth of liberation theology. And it's been hotly condemned by a lot of the church hierarchy. The current Pope, Pope Ratzinger, hates it. And, he's a scumbag, and I don't see why we should really care what he says. But, there we are. But anyway, to go further onward, liberation theology, it does make use of certain Marxist concepts. It's not necessarily Marxist, but it urges Catholics and Christians to put a preferential option for the poor. And Camilo Torres, in a sense, is the highest embodiment of this, and it's a fusion of the best social thinking that's probably ever come out of Catholicism and its fusion for revolutionary social change. And he was willing to put it into practice. So I urge you to check out Camilo Torres. I urge you to understand his message that if Jesus was alive today, he'd be a guerrilla. Ever onward to victory.